Hey guys, tonight we dim the lights. Perhaps grab that cozy blanket and prepare to embark on a journey into the shadows of history, those moments, whispers, and outright cover-ups they really didn't want you to know about. Imagine, if you will, the hushed tones in dusty government archives, the frantic phone calls in dimly lit offices, the sheer panic of information about to burst into the unforgiving light of day. We're talking about secrets so profound, so meticulously guarded, that entire narratives were spun just to keep them under wraps. And here's the cheeky reality check. You probably won't survive this journey without a few lingering questions tickling the back of your brain, making you wonder what else is out there. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our first stop on this shadowy tour takes us deep into the desolate plains of New Mexico, specifically to a ranch near Roswell, in the summer of 1947. You're there, feeling the dry desert air, the vast emptiness stretching out around you. Imagine a rancher, W.W. Brazel, just going about his business, checking on his sheep, when he stumbles upon something utterly bizarre. Not a stray tumbleweed, not even a lost cow, but a field of strange, lightweight debris, rubber strips, tinfoil, exceptionally strong paper, and sticks, pieces unlike anything he'd ever seen, yet seemingly manufactured. This isn't just a quirky tidbit for your next dinner party. It's the spark that ignited one of history's most enduring mysteries. Initially, the local Roswell Army Airfield Public Relations Officer, Jesse Marcel, issued a press release that set the world on its ear. The headline, "RAF Captures Flying Saucer on Ranch in Roswell Region." Can you imagine the frenzy? The sheer, unadulterated shockwaves that must have rippled through the populace. A flying saucer. It sounds almost quaint now, like something out of a 1950s B-movie. But at the time, it was a profound, world-altering announcement. This was a mainstream historical fact, printed in newspapers across the country, discussed in hushed tones around kitchen tables. But then, almost as quickly as it appeared, the truth, or a truth, anyway, vanished. Within hours, the narrative pivoted dramatically. General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force, held a press conference. And what did he present? Not fragments of an alien spacecraft, but meteorological debris, a weather balloon and its radar target. He even posed for photos with the supposed remains. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief, or perhaps disappointment, depending on your preferred brand of existential dread. The initial excitement was deflated faster than a punctured party balloon. Nothing to see here, folks, just a really fancy weather balloon. It was a masterful, if clumsy, exercise in damage control. Now, pause and think about that swift reversal, from flying saucer to weather balloon, in the blink of an eye. For many, this sudden change didn't quell their curiosity, it ignited suspicion. Why the immediate retraction? Why the need to so thoroughly control the narrative? It's almost as if someone, somewhere, realized they'd let a very big cat out of a very unusual bag. This is where the story truly begins to thicken, where the tendrils of what if start to intertwine with the official record. The government's official explanation held for decades. You were expected to just accept it. Move along. Nothing to see here. No little green men. Just atmospheric data. But the seeds of doubt have been sown. Over the years, witnesses came forward, often many years later, recounting tales that contradicted the official weather balloon story. Some spoke of unusual metallic wreckage, unlike any known alloy. Others whispered about bodies, non-human bodies, recovered from the crash site. The testimonies, often from credible individuals who had served in the military or were involved in the recovery, painted a very different picture. Historians still argue whether these later testimonies are genuine recollections of suppressed events or the result of collective memory influenced by decades of speculative narratives. Was it a genuine, though mistaken, identification initially, or was it a deliberate, swift, and effective cover-up of something truly extraordinary? The enduring question, like a persistent earworm, remains: what really crashed in Roswell, and why was the initial story so quickly and thoroughly buried under layers of mundane explanation? The desert still holds its secrets, perhaps forever. From the vast, mysterious skies over Roswell, we now descend into a much darker, far more tangible human horror, one that played out not with alien technology, but with the very lives of American citizens. We're talking about the Tuskegee syphilis study, a name that, for many, still sends a shiver down the spine. Imagine, if you will, the early 20th century in rural Macon County, Alabama. The year is 1932. You're a poor, black sharecropper, struggling to make ends meet, perhaps with limited access to medical care. Along come representatives from the United States Public Health Service, offering something too good to be true: free medical care for bad blood, a local euphemism for various ailments. This was a mainstream historical fact, initiated under the guise of public health. The catch, the horrifying, unethical twist, was that the researchers weren't treating bad blood. They were observing its natural progression. For 40 long years, until 1972, hundreds of African American men with syphilis were deliberately left untreated. Even after penicillin, a known cure, became widely available in the 1940s. Can you even begin to wrap your head around that? Medical professionals, sworn to heal, actively withholding life-saving treatment from vulnerable individuals, purely for the sake of observation. It's the kind of scenario that makes you want to check your own pulse, just to make sure you're still on the side of humanity. Think about the sheer audacity of it. These men weren't just patients, they were, in the eyes of the researchers, human specimens. They were promised free meals, free rides to the clinic, and burial stipends, all while their bodies slowly succumbed to the ravages of an entirely treatable disease. They suffered blindness, insanity, heart disease, bone damage, and eventually, death, all preventable. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the most insidious cover-ups aren't about hiding something spectacular, but about burying uncomfortable truths about our own failings. The lies weren't just verbal, they were systemic, woven into the very fabric of the study. This quirky tidbit, if you can call such a horrific detail quirky, is the name given to the study participants themselves in some official documents: syphilis patients. Not men, not individuals, but a clinical label that stripped them of their humanity, making it easier, perhaps, for those involved to compartmentalize the monstrous ethical breach. Historians still argue whether the initial intent was purely observational or if the long-term withholding of treatment evolved out of a perverse scientific curiosity that trumped all moral considerations. Was it ignorance, or something far more sinister? The cover-up here wasn't about a grand conspiracy with secret agents and code names. It was a quieter, more insidious kind of concealment, the cover-up of ethical responsibility. It was the medical establishment turning a blind eye, justifying the unjustifiable, and allowing a horrific experiment to continue for decades. The men involved were, in essence, trapped in a medical lie, unable to give informed consent because the true nature of the treatment was deliberately obscured. Imagine being told you're receiving care, trusting those in white coats, only for your health to steadily decline while the cure sits on a shelf just out of reach. It's a profound betrayal of trust, both individual and societal. The study only came to light in 1972, thanks to a whistleblower named Peter Buxton, a public health service employee who leaked details to the press. His courage finally pulled back the curtain on this medical atrocity, sparking public outrage and leading to sweeping changes in ethical guidelines for human experimentation. But for those men, and for their families, the damage was done. The Tuskegee study stands as a stark, painful reminder that sometimes, the biggest secrets aren't hiding advanced technology or alien encounters, but the deeply uncomfortable truths about human cruelty and institutional negligence. It's a scar on the face of medical history, A permanent stain that whispers a chilling question: what other ethical lines have been blurred? Or perhaps even erased, in the name of progress or knowledge, without anyone ever finding out? You drift off, perhaps, wondering about the Hippocratic Oath, and the fine line between research and outright exploitation. From the hushed horror of medical experimentation, we now glide across the waters, just 90 miles from American shores, to a tropical island nation that became a chilling battleground of covert operations. You find yourself, in your mind's eye, in the spring of 1961, feeling the humid air, perhaps hearing the distant thrum of boat engines, and the nervous chatter of exiles. We're talking, of course, about the Bay of Pigs invasion, a debacle so profound it redefined the very concept of a secret operation gone spectacularly wrong. This was a mainstream historical fact, an event etched into the memory of the Cold War. Imagine a clandestine operation, meticulously planned, or so they thought, by the CIA. The goal: to overthrow Fidel Castro's communist regime in Cuba. The chosen instruments: a brigade of Cuban exiles, trained and armed by the United States. The idea was simple, almost elegant in its supposed stealth: a covert landing, designed to spark a popular uprising, making it look like an internal Cuban affair. A proper, we had nothing to do with it, honest, kind of operation. You can almost picture the strategists in Langley, hunched over maps, meticulously planning every detail, convinced they were pulling off a geopolitical magic trick. But here's the quirky tidbit that adds a layer of almost farcical incompetence to the tragedy: the invasion plan. Initially conceived under Eisenhower, inherited by Kennedy, was notoriously leaky, so leaky, in fact, that Castro himself reportedly knew the invasion was coming, and roughly when and where, long before the exiles even set foot on the beach. It's like trying to surprise someone with a birthday party when they've already seen the cake delivery and heard you whispering about balloons for weeks. Historians still argue whether this leak was due to widespread Cuban intelligence infiltration, overconfidence on the part of the CIA, or simply the inherent difficulty of keeping hundreds of exiles quiet. Perhaps it was a combination of all three, creating a perfect storm of disastrous transparency. The invasion, when it finally began on April 17, 1961, was a catastrophe from the word go. You can almost feel the spray of the waves against the landing craft as the exiles hit the beaches of Playa Girón. Their air support, crucial for neutralizing Castro's small air force, was significantly scaled back at the last minute by President Kennedy, fearing overt U.S. involvement. This decision proved fatal. Without air cover, the invading forces were sitting ducks for Castro's military, which was far better prepared and larger than anticipated. The promised popular uprising never materialized. Instead of a triumphant march, it became a bloody retreat. The cover-up here wasn't about hiding the fact of the invasion. That was impossible once the fighting started. It was about hiding the extent of U.S. involvement, the profound miscalculations, and the sheer humiliation of the defeat. The U.S. government initially denied direct involvement, clinging to the flimsy narrative that it was an internal Cuban matter. Imagine the frantic PR teams, scrambling to spin the narrative, while the world watched the spectacle of an American-backed invasion crumbling in real time. It was an attempt to maintain plausible deniability, a term that became almost a cynical joke after Bay of Pigs. Kennedy himself, a young president still finding his footing, took full responsibility for the failure. While admirable in its honesty, that admission came only after the disaster had unfolded for all to see. The secrecy that preceded the invasion was meant to ensure its success and minimize international outcry. Instead, its exposure highlighted American arrogance and amateurism. The Bay of Pigs became a stark lesson in the limitations of covert action, a cautionary tale whispered in intelligence circles for decades. It showed that even with the best intentions, or at least ostensible intentions, trying to engineer another country's destiny from the shadows can blow up spectacularly in your face. As you drift into deeper slumber, you might find yourself pondering the delicate dance between secrecy and transparency. and how easily one can betray the other. From the shores of Cuba, where a covert operation sank like a stone, we now turn our gaze inward, into the very fabric of American society, and a cover-up far more subtle, yet arguably just as pervasive. You're now transported to the mid-20th century, feeling the chill of the Cold War paranoia, hearing the static hiss of radio news, and perhaps the faint click of a camera shutter. We're talking about Operation Mockingbird, the alleged CIA program that aimed to influence domestic and foreign media, manipulating public perception right under your nose. This isn't just some fringe conspiracy theory. Elements of it have been confirmed, though its full scope remains a subject of intense debate. This was a mainstream historical fact that became a public scandal. Imagine a world where the news you consumed, the articles you read, the very narratives shaping your understanding of global events, might have been subtly influenced, or even outright crafted, by intelligence agencies. The idea is unsettling, isn't it? The core allegation of Operation Mockingbird was that the CIA secretly recruited journalists, writers, and media outlets to disseminate propaganda, plant disinformation, or simply gather intelligence. The goal, ostensibly, was to win the ideological battle against communism, but the method involved blurring the lines between objective reporting and covert psychological warfare. You can almost picture a shadowy figure in a trench coat slipping an envelope to a seemingly innocuous reporter in a dimly lit cafe. A scene straight out of a spy novel. Here's a quirky tidbit that adds to the intrigue. One of the most prominent figures associated with exposing aspects of Mockingbird was Carl Bernstein. Yes, that Carl Bernstein, of Watergate fame. After his groundbreaking work on Watergate, he turned his investigative lens to the CIA's alleged media manipulation, publishing a significant Rolling Stone article in 1977. This suggested a network of hundreds of individuals, including prominent journalists, who had secret relationships with the agency. Historians still argue whether the term Operation Mockingbird refers to a specific, formalized program or a more general, decentralized approach to media influence. Was it a highly structured operation with a codename, or just the natural, messy outcome of a powerful agency seeking to control information? The distinction matters, but the underlying concern remains. The cover-up here was multifaceted. Firstly, it was the inherent secrecy of the operation itself. By its very nature, a program to influence the media relies on the public remaining unaware of that influence. You weren't supposed to know that the news story you were reading might have been subtly nudged, or even created, by intelligence operatives. Secondly, it was the persistent denial and obfuscation by the CIA and the government for decades. When allegations first surfaced, they were largely dismissed as conspiracy theories. It took significant journalistic digging and later, congressional inquiries, to force out even partial admissions. The CIA, in 1975, publicly admitted to having relationships with journalists as part of its foreign propaganda efforts, but maintained that these were primarily for foreign audiences and denied widespread domestic manipulation. It was a carefully worded admission, designed to minimize fallout, but the revelations, even partial ones, shattered public trust in institutions, particularly the press. Imagine feeling that the very guardians of truth might, in fact, be conduits for covert government narratives. It's a fundamental betrayal of the democratic ideal, where an informed citizenry is paramount. The idea that fake news isn't a modern invention but has historical roots in state-sponsored manipulation is a sobering thought, isn't it? The legacy of Operation Mockingbird, whether it was a formalized program or a pervasive cultural dynamic within the intelligence community, continues to resonate in modern debates about media bias, government transparency, and the elusive nature of truth. As you drift deeper into sleep, perhaps you're left wondering, who truly controls the narratives we consume? And how much of what we believe is truly our own discovery? Having peered into the subtle, unsettling world of media manipulation, we now turn to a scandal that ripped through the very heart of American democracy. forever altering the public's perception of presidential power and accountability. You're now stepping into the early 1970s, feeling the weight of societal unrest, perhaps hearing the faint echoes of protest songs, and the insistent hum of investigative typewriters. We are, of course, talking about Watergate, a name synonymous with cover-up, political intrigue, and the downfall of a president. This was a mainstream historical fact, a seismic event that shook the foundations of American governance. Imagine a seemingly minor break-in, a third-rate burglary, as it was initially dismissed, at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate Hotel complex in Washington, D.C., on June 17, 1972. 5 men, caught red-handed attempting to bug the offices. Sounds almost comical in its simplicity, doesn't it? Like something out of a bad spy parody. But this seemingly insignificant event was just the tip of an enormous, festering iceberg of political malfeasance, illegal activities, and a systematic attempt to obstruct justice from the highest office in the land. Here's a quirky tidbit that demonstrates the sheer audacity of the operation. The burglars were found with sophisticated bugging equipment, walkie-talkies, and large sums of cash, some of which was traced back to President Nixon's re-election campaign. The Committee to Re-elect the President, CREEP. This wasn't some random act of vandalism, it was a professional, politically motivated espionage attempt. Historians still argue whether Nixon himself explicitly ordered the break-in or if he was simply aware of and condoned the broader culture of political sabotage and dirty tricks that permeated his administration. The line between direct order and tacit approval can sometimes be as thin as a single strand of tape over a door lock. The cover-up was the real scandal. It wasn't about hiding the break-in itself, which was immediately apparent. It was about concealing the White House's connection to it, orchestrating a massive campaign of obstruction of justice, perjury, and destruction of evidence. You can almost visualize the frantic shredding of documents, the hushed conversations in the Oval Office, the money being paid to keep the burglars silent. President Nixon and his closest aides systematically attempted to use the powers of their office to stonewall investigations by the FBI, the Justice Department, and Congress. They directed aides to lie under oath, offered clemency to those involved, and created a pervasive atmosphere of fear and loyalty that made exposing the truth incredibly difficult. But 2 young journalists, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, remember him from Mockingbird, working for the Washington Post, refused to let go. Guided by a secret source, Deep Throat, later revealed to be FBI Associate Director Mark Felt, they relentlessly pursued the story, connecting the dots between the burglars and the highest echelons of power. Their unwavering pursuit, along with the efforts of a determined Congress and brave federal judges, slowly unraveled the tapestry of lies. The revelation of secret White House audio tapes Nixon himself had installed, proved to be the smoking gun, containing damning evidence of his direct involvement in the cover-up. Imagine listening to your own president, caught red-handed, discussing ways to impede justice. The pressure mounted, leading to impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives. Faced with certain impeachment and conviction, Richard Nixon resigned on August 9, 1974, becoming the only U.S. president to do so. It was a profound moment, a testament to the power of a free press and the checks and balances inherent in a democratic system. Even when those systems are pushed to their breaking point, Watergate showed the world that even the most powerful individuals are not above the law, and that even the most sophisticated attempts to hide the truth can ultimately fail. As you drift off, you might ponder the delicate balance of power, and how even a seemingly small act can, through a web of deceit, bring down an empire. From the political machinations of Watergate, where the minds of men sought to control power, we now plunge into an even more disturbing realm, the attempts to control the human mind itself. You're now transported to the shadowy corridors of the mid-20th century, feeling the chilling grip of Cold War paranoia, perhaps hearing the faint clicks of electrodes and the distant hum of a flickering fluorescent light. We are, of course, talking about MK Ultra, the infamous CIA program that explored mind control, psychological manipulation, and the potential of drugs to extract information or influence behavior. This was a mainstream historical fact. A program so ethically dubious it still sends shivers down the spines of those who learn about it. Imagine, if you will, a top-secret government project designed to unlock the secrets of the human psyche. Not for healing, but for control. The premise was terrifyingly simple. Could the CIA find a way to make people confess secrets against their will? Forget specific events, or even be programmed to carry out actions without conscious awareness? The answer, as it turned out, involved a deeply unethical and often brutal series of experiments on unwitting subjects. You can almost picture scientists in lab coats, with grim determination, pushing the boundaries of human endurance and sanity. Here's a quirky tidbit that highlights the sheer desperation and bizarre nature of these experiments. The CIA openly, and often illegally, experimented with LSD, not just on willing participants but also on unwitting American and Canadian citizens. They spiked drinks at parties, administered the drug to mental patients, prisoners, and even prostitutes, observing the effects. One particularly infamous incident involved an army scientist, Frank Olson, who was given LSD without his knowledge and died shortly after, allegedly by suicide, though his family later argued foul play. Historians still argue whether the extreme methods used in MK-Ultra were a result of genuine scientific curiosity unchecked by ethical oversight, or a deliberate, calculated risk taken in the frantic race for intelligence superiority during the Cold War. Was it reckless science, or desperate necessity? The cover-up of MK-Ultra was, for many years, exceptionally effective. The project began in the early 1950s and continued for over 2 decades, operating under the highest levels of secrecy. When congressional investigations began in the mid-1970s, spurred by the revelations of the Watergate era and the broader Church Committee investigations into intelligence abuses, the CIA admitted to destroying most of the MK-Ultra records in 1973. This deliberate act of destruction was the ultimate cover-up, an attempt to erase any trace of the program's existence and its unsavory activities. Imagine the frantic shredding, the burning of documents, the wiping clean of digital files, if they had them back then, all to ensure that the truth would never see the light of day. However, despite the destruction, a trove of some 20,000 documents survived, mostly due to an administrative error where they were misfiled. These surviving documents provided tantalizing glimpses into the horrific scope of the program, revealing experiments involving electroshock therapy, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and the administration of various drugs, all in the pursuit of controlling the mind. The revelations were shocking, exposing a government agency that had veered wildly beyond its mandate, trampling on human rights in the name of national security. The legacy of MK-Ultra lingers like a bad dream. It shattered public trust in government agencies, fueled countless conspiracy theories, and raised profound questions about the ethical limits of scientific research and intelligence gathering. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the most profound secrets aren't about what's out there, but what our own institutions are capable of doing, hidden in plain sight, to their own citizens. As you drift off to sleep, perhaps you're left wondering about the true power of the human mind, and the disturbing lengths some will go to try and control it. Having delved into the disturbing depths of mind control experiments, we now float into the realm of the truly fantastical, a tale so extraordinary it blurs the line between historical possibility and outright myth. You're now transported to the tumultuous backdrop of World War II, feeling the grim determination of wartime innovation, and perhaps the distant clang of metal on metal in a naval shipyard. We are talking about the Philadelphia experiment, a legendary story of a U.S. Navy destroyer allegedly rendered invisible and even teleported. This is a quirky or fringe tidbit, certainly not a mainstream historical fact, but one that has captivated the imagination for decades. Imagine the year 1943. The U.S. Navy is desperately seeking an advantage against Axis powers. The story goes that scientists at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, working under a cloak of extreme secrecy, were experimenting with Albert Einstein's unified field theory. Their goal: to bend electromagnetic waves around a ship, making it invisible to enemy radar. Sounds like something straight out of a comic book, doesn't it? A warship, shimmering, then vanishing into thin air. The core of the legend centers on the USS Eldridge, Delaware 173. The most dramatic version of the story claims that during a full-power test of their experimental equipment, the Eldridge not only became invisible, but also dematerialized entirely from Philadelphia, reappearing moments later in Norfolk, Virginia, hundreds of miles away, before vanishing again and returning to Philadelphia. Here's a quirky tidbit that adds to the macabre nature of the tale. Some versions of the story claim that when the Eldridge reappeared, some crew members were fused into the ship's metal, others were driven insane, and some even suffered from molecular disruption, becoming half solid, half transparent, fading in and out of existence. It's certainly a vivid image, albeit a horrifying one. Historians still argue whether the entire story is a complete fabrication, a misinterpretation of a real but far less sensational event, or perhaps a deliberate disinformation campaign. Was it a kernel of truth exaggerated beyond all recognition, or just a good old-fashioned tall tale? The cover-up in this instance is less about hiding a verifiable event and more about controlling a persistent narrative that the Navy insists is pure fiction. If the Philadelphia experiment did happen, the cover-up would involve suppressing all evidence of the successful, or disastrously successful, teleportation and invisibility technology. The fate of the crew, and the very existence of such advanced, world-altering physics. The Navy's official stance has consistently been that no such experiment ever took place. That the USS Eldridge was never involved in any invisibility research. And that the story is entirely a hoax. They provide logs and records of the Eldridge's movements that contradict the teleportation claims. However, the legend persists, fueled by eyewitness accounts, or alleged eyewitness accounts, from individuals like Carl Meredith Allen, also known as Carlos Allende, who claimed to have witnessed the event and later sent letters to ufologist Morris K. Jessup, sparking wider public interest. These accounts, often inconsistent and later retracted or embellished, add layers of mystery and unreliability. The allure of the story lies in its delicious possibility. If such technology existed in the 1940s, what else could be hidden? It taps into our inherent fascination with the unknown, with the idea that science fiction might actually be science fact, meticulously shielded from public view. Ultimately, the Philadelphia experiment serves as a fascinating example of how a narrative can take on a life of its own, becoming almost more real than any official denial. It's a testament to the power of storytelling and the human desire to believe in something extraordinary, especially when it challenges the conventional understanding of physics. As you drift into a deeper sleep, you might find yourself pondering the fine line between scientific possibility and fantastic fiction, and wondering what other incredible breakthroughs might be waiting, perhaps hidden in plain sight, just beyond our current comprehension. From the dazzling, impossible feats of the Philadelphia experiment, we now shift to a far more concrete, yet equally murky, event that plunged the United States deeper into a devastating conflict. You are transported to the humid, tension-filled waters off the coast of Vietnam in the summer of 1964. Perhaps hearing the distant hum of naval engines and the crackle of radio static. We are talking about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, a controversial series of alleged attacks that dramatically escalated American involvement in the Vietnam War. This was a mainstream historical fact, but one shrouded in significant deception. Imagine two U.S. Navy destroyers, the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy, patrolling the Gulf of Tonkin, off the coast of North Vietnam. On August 2, 1964, the USS Maddox reported being attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. This was widely reported and confirmed. But then, on the night of August 4, Amidst stormy weather and confusion, both destroyers reported a second attack. This second incident, however, was highly dubious, filled with conflicting radar reports, sonar anomalies, and the general fog of war. You can almost feel the heightened tension on the bridge. The frantic shouts, the desperate attempts to discern friend from foe in the darkness. Here's a quirky tidbit that underscores the uncertainty of that second incident. Captain John Herrick, commander of the destroyers, himself expressed doubt about the August 4th attack, cabling Washington hours after the alleged engagement to say that freak weather effects on radar and overeager sonar men might have led to misinterpretations, and that no actual visual sightings of enemy vessels had been made. He later added, "Suggest complete evaluation before further action." Historians still argue whether the second attack was a genuine, though perhaps overblown, engagement, or a complete fabrication stemming from miscommunication and atmospheric conditions. Was it a colossal misunderstanding, or a deliberate piece of misinformation? The cover-up surrounding the Gulf of Tonkin was less about hiding an event and more about fabricating or exaggerating one to justify a dramatic policy shift. President Lyndon B. Johnson's administration, eager for a mandate to escalate military action in Vietnam, seized upon the alleged August 4th incident, despite Herrick's doubts and other intelligence assessments that questioned the reality of the second attack. Johnson went before the American public and Congress, portraying the events as unprovoked aggression by North Vietnam. He famously declared, "We seek no wider war." Within days, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, a sweeping legislative act that gave President Johnson the authority to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. This resolution effectively became the legal basis for the massive escalation of the Vietnam War, transforming a limited advisory role into a full-scale military commitment involving hundreds of thousands of troops. Imagine the speed with which this pivotal decision was made, built on such shaky ground. Years later, declassified documents and internal government recordings revealed that senior officials within the Johnson administration knew, or at least had strong reasons to doubt, that the second attack had occurred. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara later admitted that the August 4th incident was likely a mistake. The truth was deliberately obscured, or at least conveniently ignored, to achieve a political objective, to gain public and congressional support for a war that was already being planned. It's a chilling example of how easily a nation can be propelled into conflict based on questionable intelligence and a carefully crafted narrative. As you drift deeper into sleep, you might reflect on the immense power of information, or the lack thereof, in shaping the destiny of nations, and the heavy price paid when that information is distorted. From the murky waters of the Gulf of Tonkin, where a dubious incident propelled a nation into war, we now pivot to another entanglement of covert operations, this time involving secret arms deals and the funding of proxy wars. You're transported to the politically charged 1980s, feeling the simmering tensions of the Cold War's twilight, perhaps hearing the faint click of telex machines and the hushed tones of high-stakes negotiations. We are, of course, talking about Iran-Contra, a scandal that exposed a clandestine web of arms sales to an enemy nation and the illegal diversion of funds to anti-communist rebels. This was a mainstream historical fact, a complex and deeply controversial chapter in American foreign policy. Imagine a situation where the official policy of the United States was to refuse to negotiate with terrorists and to maintain an arms embargo against Iran, which was then holding American hostages. Sounds straightforward enough, right? But behind the scenes, a different game was being played. The quirky tidbit that sets this entire saga in motion is that high-ranking officials in the Reagan administration were secretly facilitating the sale of arms, like anti-tank missiles, to Iran, hoping to secure the release of American hostages held by Hezbollah, a group linked to Iran. It was a classic ends justify the means scenario, or so they thought, but one that directly contradicted stated U.S. policy. You can almost picture the secret meetings, The hushed phone calls, the late-night flights carrying illicit cargo. But the story gets even more convoluted. The proceeds from these secret arms sales to Iran were then illegally diverted to fund the Contras, a rebel group fighting the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. This funding was explicitly prohibited by Congress through the Boland Amendment, which restricted U.S. aid to the Contras. So, in essence, the administration was simultaneously violating an arms embargo and bypassing congressional will. Historians still argue whether President Reagan was fully aware of the illegal diversion of funds, or if he was simply disconnected from the details of the operation, allowing his subordinates to run rogue. Was he complicit, or merely out of the loop? The cover-up in Iran-Contra was immense and multifaceted. It involved a systematic effort to conceal the arms sales to Iran, the diversion of funds to the Contras, and the extent of high-level involvement. Documents were shredded, false testimonies were given, and a complex web of intermediaries, shell corporations, and Swiss bank accounts was used to obscure the money trail. Imagine the frantic efforts to create plausible deniability, to build layers of separation between the president and the illicit activities. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, a National Security Council aide, became a central figure in this scheme, openly admitting to shredding documents and attempting to mislead Congress. When the scandal finally broke in late 1986, it ignited a political firestorm. Congressional hearings were held, captivating the nation with their dramatic revelations and the often defiant testimony of key figures like North. The legal fallout was significant, with several administration officials indicted and convicted, though some convictions were later overturned on technicalities. The Iran-Contra affair severely damaged the Reagan administration's credibility, eroding public trust and raising serious questions about executive overreach and accountability. It was a stark reminder that even a popular president could be embroiled in a scandal of epic proportions. The lasting impact of Iran-Contra is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked executive power and the erosion of the rule of law in the name of perceived national interest. It showed how easily a government can stray from its declared principles when operating in the shadows. As you drift into deeper slumber, you might find yourself pondering the delicate balance between national security and democratic oversight, and the enduring temptation to bypass the rules when the stakes feel incredibly high. From the intricate web of arms deals and secret funding that was Iran-Contra, we now turn to a moment that halted a nation, an event so sudden and shocking that its ripples are felt even today, still generating endless debate and alternative theories. You're transported to Dallas, Texas, on November 22, 1963, feeling the crisp autumn air, hearing the cheers of a crowd, and then, the chilling sound of gunshots echoing through Dealey Plaza. We are, of course, talking about the Kennedy assassination, a mainstream historical fact that remains one of history's most persistent and pervasive unsolved mysteries, at least in the public imagination. Imagine the motorcade, a symbol of hope and progress, winding its way through the streets. President John F. Kennedy, First Lady Jackie Kennedy, Governor John Connally, all waving to adoring crowds. And then, in an instant, everything changes. The official narrative, established by the Warren Commission, concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald, a disgruntled former Marine, acted alone in assassinating the president from the Texas schoolbook depository. He fired 3 shots, striking Kennedy twice and Connally once. This is the cornerstone of the official story. Here's a quirky tidbit that fuels endless speculation: the magic bullet theory. Officially known as the single bullet theory, this theory posits that a single bullet, fired by Oswald, struck President Kennedy in the back, exited his throat, and then proceeded to hit Governor Connally, passing through his chest, wrist, and finally lodging in his thigh, all while remaining largely intact. Critics argue this trajectory is physically impossible, requiring the bullet to change direction multiple times. Historians still argue whether the evidence definitively supports the lone gunman theory, or if the sheer number of inconsistencies and unanswered questions warrants further investigation into broader conspiracies. Was it a simple, tragic act, or something far more complex and orchestrated? The cover-up in the Kennedy assassination isn't about hiding the fact that he was killed. That was undeniably public. Instead, it's about the perceived suppression of evidence, the alleged manipulation of investigations, and the dismissal of alternative theories. For many, the swift conclusion of the Warren Commission, formed just days after the assassination, felt rushed and incomplete. Questions immediately arose. Were there other shooters? Why were witnesses' testimonies seemingly downplayed or ignored? What about the mysterious grassy knoll? You can almost picture the government officials, desperate to restore order and stability, perhaps inadvertently creating more suspicion by trying to control the narrative too tightly. The secrecy surrounding documents, the slow pace of declassification over decades, and the destruction of certain materials have only fueled public distrust. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, formed in the late 1970s, revisited the case and concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, even if it couldn't identify the conspirators or the number of gunmen. This seemingly contradictory conclusion only deepened the mystery, acknowledging the possibility of a conspiracy while offering no concrete answers. The Kennedy assassination remains an open wound in the American psyche, a moment when the belief in clear, understandable events was shattered by a hail of gunfire and a cloud of unanswered questions. It stands as a powerful testament to how a profound national trauma, when accompanied by a perceived lack of transparency, can create a fertile ground for enduring conspiracy theories. The idea that such a pivotal moment in history could be manipulated or hidden from the public consciousness continues to resonate deeply. As you drift deeper into sleep, perhaps you're left pondering the elusive nature of truth, and how some secrets, even when officially closed, continue to whisper in the collective subconscious. From the enduring shadows of political assassinations, where questions of lone gunmen and hidden plots continue to swirl, we now leap forward to a much more recent and globally impactful event. One that fundamentally reshaped daily life across the planet. You're now transported to the early 2020s, feeling the weight of uncertainty, perhaps hearing the constant hum of news alerts and the distant coughs of a worried world. We are talking about pandemic theories, the various controversial narratives surrounding the origins and handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a contemporary and ongoing public debate, touching on both mainstream facts and widespread fringe tidbits. Imagine, if you will, a novel virus emerging, rapidly spreading across continents, causing widespread illness, death, and unprecedented societal lockdowns. The mainstream scientific consensus, a mainstream historical fact that you've lived through, is that SARS-CoV-2 originated in bats, likely transmitted to humans through an intermediate animal host, possibly at a wet market in Wuhan, China. This zoonotic spillover is a common pathway for new infectious diseases. You can almost recall the initial fear, the frantic search for information, and the sudden, jarring shift in global routines. But here's a quirky tidbit that sparked a maelstrom of alternative theories: the sheer speed and global reach of the pandemic, combined with initial governmental responses, led many to question the official narrative. One of the most prominent pandemic theories suggests that the virus was deliberately engineered in a laboratory, perhaps as a bioweapon, or even as part of a grand scheme by powerful elites to control populations. Another popular theory posits that the pandemic was not a natural event at all, but a pre-planned operation designed to usher in a new world order, or to impose global authoritarian control. Historians, or rather, future historians, will undoubtedly argue whether these theories were genuine attempts to find alternative truths, or simply a byproduct of widespread fear, mistrust in institutions, and the rapid spread of misinformation in the digital age. Was it genuine skepticism, or a symptom of a fractured informational landscape? The cover-up, in the context of pandemic theories, isn't necessarily about a single, hidden event, but about the alleged suppression of alternative explanations and the promotion of a singular, official narrative. Proponents of these theories argue that governments, scientific bodies, and mainstream media actively suppressed dissenting voices, censored information that challenged the official story, and perhaps even manipulated data to justify lockdowns, vaccine mandates, and other public health measures. Imagine a complex web of global institutions, all working in concert to hide a truth they didn't want you to know. This perspective often frames the scientific community's rapid response, the development of vaccines, and public health campaigns as part of the concealment itself, rather than efforts to combat the virus. The public debate around these theories was, and remains, incredibly polarized, marked by intense emotional responses and a deep distrust of established authorities. Information silos formed, with different groups consuming entirely different sets of facts. The digital age, with its instant global communication, allowed these theories to spread with unprecedented speed, reaching millions and fostering communities of belief outside traditional media channels. It's a powerful illustration of how the perception of a cover-up can be just as impactful as a proven one, especially when fueled by a lack of perceived transparency and an abundance of conflicting information. The challenge with pandemic theories lies in distinguishing genuine scientific inquiry from conspiratorial thinking, and in navigating an information environment where facts and speculation often intertwine seamlessly. As you drift deeper into sleep, perhaps you're left pondering the fragility of truth in an interconnected world, and how the search for answers can sometimes lead down paths less traveled, or even into realms of pure conjecture. From the urgent, modern anxieties of pandemic theories, where the truth itself felt fluid, we now journey deep into the mists of antiquity, searching for a legendary place whose existence has tantalized explorers and thinkers for millennia. You're now transported to ancient Greece, perhaps feeling the salty spray of the Aegean Sea, and hearing the distant murmur of philosophical debate. We are talking about Atlantis, the fabled lost continent, a city-state of unparalleled advancement that allegedly vanished beneath the waves. This is a quirky or fringe tidbit, certainly not a mainstream historical fact, but one that continues to fuel boundless archaeological and speculative inquiry. Imagine, if you will, a powerful and technologically advanced civilization, far beyond its time, flourishing thousands of years ago, a utopian society with grand architecture, sophisticated engineering, and perhaps even esoteric knowledge. This vision of Atlantis largely stems from the writings of the Greek philosopher Plato, who described it in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias around 360 BC. He detailed a formidable naval power, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, that attempted to conquer Athens but was ultimately defeated. As punishment from the gods, Atlantis was then swallowed by the sea, in a single day and night of misfortune. This foundational story, a mainstream historical fact in terms of its origin in Platonic philosophy, is what has launched 1,000 expeditions and countless theories. Here's a quirky tidbit that demonstrates the enduring allure and varied interpretations of Atlantis. Plato's description of Atlantis includes concentric rings of land and water, elaborate canals, and vast natural resources, while many scholars view Plato's account as an allegorical tale, a cautionary myth designed to illustrate philosophical points about hubris and ideal societies. Countless others have taken it literally, from the Bimini Road in the Bahamas to theories involving Antarctica or even the Canary Islands. People have spent centuries scouring the globe for its physical remains. Historians and archaeologists still argue whether Plato's account was a pure work of fiction, a philosophical parable inspired by earlier historical events like the eruption of Thera, Santorini, which devastated the Minoan civilization, or if it contains a hidden kernel of a lost truth. Was it moral allegory, historical echo, or geographical truth? The cover-up of Atlantis, if it exists, isn't a deliberate act by a modern government or institution. Instead, it's the profound passage of time, the relentless forces of geology, and the inherent fragility of ancient records. If Atlantis truly existed, its cover-up would be natural, a cataclysmic event. Perhaps a massive earthquake or tsunami that literally buried or submerged an entire civilization, erasing it from human memory save for fragments passed down through oral tradition or philosophical texts. Imagine the sheer scale of such a disaster, wiping away an entire advanced society, leaving no trace but a whisper in the wind and a philosophical thought experiment. The fascination with Atlantis persists because it taps into a fundamental human desire to believe in lost knowledge, forgotten histories, and the possibility of advanced civilizations that predated our own. It's a compelling thought. What if there were ancient secrets, powerful technologies, or profound understandings that were simply swallowed by the earth or the sea, hidden from us by the vastness of time itself? Every new underwater discovery, every unexplained ancient ruin, rekindles the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the legend of Atlantis is more than just a myth. It's the ultimate historical puzzle, a secret kept not by design, but by the overwhelming forces of nature. As you drift deeper into sleep, perhaps you're left wondering about the countless civilizations that might have risen and fallen, lost to the sands of time, waiting to be rediscovered, or perhaps, forever veiled from our sight. From the submerged mysteries of Atlantis, where the earth and sea hold ancient secrets, we now turn our gaze to something equally tantalizing, yet perhaps even more controversial, a secret allegedly held not by nature, but by human institutions themselves. You're now transported to archaeological digs across the globe, perhaps feeling the dust of ancient lands, and hearing the hushed excitement of a discovery, quickly followed by the distinct sound of shovels burying it once more. We are talking about ancient giants, the persistent theory that archaeological findings of unusually large human remains have been deliberately suppressed or hidden from public view. This is a quirky or fringe tidbit, certainly not a mainstream historical fact, but one with a passionate following. Imagine, if you will, a history where humanity wasn't always of the size we are today. A past populated, at times, by individuals of immense stature, towering over modern humans. This idea is woven into the folklore and mythology of cultures worldwide. From the Anakim in the Bible to the giants of Norse mythology. The theory posits that these weren't just mythical beings, but actual physical beings whose remains have been discovered, only to be systematically concealed. A mainstream historical fact is that isolated finds of unusually large hominid bones do exist, though they are usually explained as individual anomalies, skeletal diseases like gigantism, or simply misidentifications of large animal bones. Here's a quirky tidbit that fuels the giant narrative. One of the most frequently cited examples of alleged suppression involves the Smithsonian Institution. Numerous online articles and books claim that the Smithsonian has unearthed thousands of giant skeletons, some reportedly over 10 feet tall, across America, only to confiscate and hide them, preserving the established evolutionary timeline that doesn't allow for such massive human ancestors. You can almost picture cavernous, secret Smithsonian basements, filled with carefully hidden bones of titanic proportions, gathered from forgotten digs. Historians and mainstream archaeologists still argue whether these claims are based on genuine, albeit rare, discoveries misinterpreted and exaggerated by those eager for sensational findings, or if they represent a deliberate campaign of misinformation targeting established scientific institutions. Is it conspiracy, or simply confirmation bias? The cover-up in the context of ancient giants is squarely aimed at the scientific establishment, particularly museums and academic institutions. Proponents of the theory argue that these bodies are actively suppressing evidence that would contradict mainstream anthropological and evolutionary models. The motive for such a cover-up, they suggest, could range from protecting established paradigms — imagine having to rewrite every history book — to maintaining control over historical narratives, or even to prevent a societal shock from a truth too profound to comprehend. Imagine an entire academic discipline collaborating to hide a fact that would upend everything they've taught. The lack of verifiable, peer-reviewed archaeological evidence for widespread giant populations. despite countless anecdotal reports and blurry old photographs, is often attributed by the theorists to this very suppression. They argue that artifacts and bones are either destroyed, hidden away in secure vaults, or dismissed as hoaxes. The scientific community, conversely, attributes the absence of such evidence to the simple fact that it doesn't exist, and that isolated anomalous finds are just that, anomalies, not proof of an entire hidden race. This theory taps into a deep human fascination with the extraordinary and a distrust of powerful institutions. It suggests that what we've been taught about our past is incomplete, or worse, deliberately misleading. The idea that significant chunks of human history are being kept from us, locked away in secret archives, is a powerful one. As you drift deeper into sleep, perhaps you're left wondering about the secrets that the Earth still holds, and whether our understanding of human origins is as complete as we think it is, or if there are indeed colossal truths waiting to be unearthed and acknowledged. From the colossal mysteries of ancient giants and the alleged suppression of their bones, we now pivot to another fundamental question about our origins, one that remains a focal point of scientific inquiry and, for some, ongoing debate about what's been revealed or hidden. You're now transported to vast, dusty archaeological sites and quiet paleontological labs, perhaps feeling the thrill of discovery, and hearing the careful brushstrokes of scientists unearthing our deep past. We are talking about the missing link, the popular term for the elusive intermediate fossil forms that connect different stages of human evolution. This is a mainstream scientific pursuit, but one that has been fertile ground for persistent fringe theories of cover-ups. Imagine, if you will, the grand tapestry of life stretching back millions of years, with various species branching off and evolving. For humanity, this involves tracing our lineage from common ancestors we shared with other primates to the modern Homo sapiens you are today. The mainstream scientific consensus, a mainstream historical fact, is that human evolution is not a linear chain, but a complex, branching bush. There isn't a single missing link, but rather numerous missing links, transitional fossils that illuminate the evolutionary journey. The fossil record is incredibly rich, with discoveries like Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy, Homo habilis, and Homo erectus providing powerful evidence of our evolutionary path. Here's a quirky tidbit that fuels the missing link cover-up narrative, despite the wealth of fossil evidence. Some argue that there's a deliberate suppression of fossils that would either disprove evolution entirely, or prove an alternative, non-Darwinian origin for humanity. These theories often suggest that the scientific establishment hides certain, anomalous, fossils that don't fit the accepted timeline, or that they exaggerate the significance of incomplete finds to prop up the evolutionary theory. You can almost picture scientists burying inconvenient bones in the desert, or perhaps meticulously altering data in dusty lab journals, all to protect their cherished academic paradigms. Historians still argue whether the occasional misinterpretations or hoaxes in the early days of paleontology, like Piltdown Man, were isolated incidents, or if they point to a broader pattern of intellectual dishonesty within the scientific community regarding human origins. Was it genuine error, or intentional deception? The cover-up in this context is often framed as the scientific community's supposed unwillingness to acknowledge, or even its active suppression of, evidence that contradicts the theory of evolution by natural selection. Proponents of this view argue that any fossil finds that challenge the established evolutionary narrative are dismissed, discredited, or simply hidden away to maintain the status quo. They suggest that the gaps in the fossil record, those periods for which transitional forms are yet to be discovered, are not simply due to the incompleteness of the record, but because crucial evidence has been intentionally withheld. Imagine entire academic departments conspiring to keep humanity ignorant of its true origins, perhaps for religious or philosophical reasons, or to preserve the funding streams tied to accepted theories. The reality, from a scientific perspective, is that the fossil record is inherently incomplete. Fossilization is a rare event, and finding ancient hominid remains is akin to finding a needle in an enormous geological haystack. Scientists are constantly searching for, and openly publishing on, new transitional fossils that fill in the gaps and refine our understanding of evolution. The excitement around discoveries like Homo naledi or Denisovans demonstrates a scientific community eager to expand, not constrain, the understanding of human lineage. However, the missing link cover-up theory thrives on a fundamental distrust of scientific authority and a desire for simpler, more dramatic answers to profound questions about our existence. It offers an alternative narrative where truth is hidden, and established knowledge is a carefully constructed illusion. As you drift deeper into sleep, perhaps you're left pondering the vast stretches of time that shaped us, and the ongoing quest to understand who we are, where we came from, and what secrets still lie buried beneath the surface of our planet. From the deep time of our evolutionary past and the elusive, missing links, we now shift to the present, to the vast, untamed wilderness of our world, where whispers of unseen creatures continue to captivate and mystify. You're now transported to the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, or perhaps the icy expanse of the Himalayas, feeling the chill of the unknown and hearing the rustle of leaves that just might be something more. We are talking about Bigfoot and cryptids, the enduring folklore and alleged sightings of reclusive, unconfirmed creatures that continue to evade scientific classification. This is a quintessential fringe tidbit, a captivating mystery without mainstream scientific acceptance, yet ripe for theories of hidden truths. Imagine, if you will, venturing into the deepest parts of the wilderness, far from civilization, and encountering something that defies all known zoology, a bipedal, ape-like creature, immensely tall and covered in fur, glimpsed fleetingly before it disappears back into the shadows, or a long-necked aquatic beast, surfacing briefly in a remote lake before submerging once more. The concept of cryptids, creatures whose existence is unproven but persistently rumored, is a global phenomenon. The mainstream historical fact, in this case, is the consistent human desire to explore the unknown and believe in mysteries beyond the everyday. You can almost feel the tingling sensation of being watched, the primal fear and excitement of confronting something truly anomalous. Here's a quirky tidbit that keeps the Bigfoot legend alive: the Patterson-Gimlin film, shot in 1967, which purports to show a female Bigfoot walking through a Northern California forest. Despite decades of analysis and debate, its authenticity remains hotly contested. Skeptics claim it's a man in a gorilla suit. Believers see it as undeniable proof. It's like the Zapruder film of the cryptid world, endlessly replayed, endlessly debated, never fully resolved. Historians still argue whether the consistent anecdotal evidence for cryptids, particularly Bigfoot, points to genuinely undiscovered species, widespread misidentification of known animals, elaborate hoaxes, or a collective psychological phenomenon rooted in our primal fear of the unknown. Is it a real animal, a cultural myth, or an elaborate prank? The cover-up concerning Bigfoot and other cryptids, if it exists, is generally attributed to either the scientific community or governmental bodies. Proponents of a cover-up theory suggest that scientific institutions refuse to acknowledge definitive proof, such as a body or clear DNA evidence, because it would upend established biological classifications and perhaps embarrass those who have dismissed the claims for so long. Imagine a museum curator secretly housing a Bigfoot specimen in a refrigerated vault, terrified of the upheaval it would cause. Similarly, some believe that governments suppress evidence to avoid public panic, or perhaps to maintain control over vast wilderness areas where these creatures allegedly reside. The idea is that the powers that be want to keep these incredible discoveries a secret, for reasons both academic and practical. The reality, from a scientific perspective, is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. While scientists are open to new discoveries, the lack of definitive, repeatable evidence, such as a body, clear skeletal remains, or irrefutable DNA, makes it impossible for cryptids to be formally recognized. The vastness and inaccessibility of many wilderness areas do make certain habitats difficult to thoroughly explore. But the consistent absence of hard evidence remains the biggest hurdle for cryptid enthusiasts. The allure of cryptids, and the notion of a cover-up surrounding them, taps into our primal sense of wonder and our desire for the world to hold more magic and mystery than it sometimes appears to. It offers the thrilling possibility that there are still grand, undiscovered secrets lurking just beyond the edge of our perception, kept from us not by nature, but by human design. It's a comforting thought, in a way, that not every mystery has been solved, and that perhaps, just perhaps, something truly extraordinary is out there, quietly avoiding our gaze.